Okay, so this morning we're going to run through our CAPPS updating tool. It makes updating P6 much easier than dealing with Excel sheets or trying to run through it in meetings in P6 and a variety of other methods that you likely use to update P6. This morning I am doing the presentation. I'm Nicole Jardin. I'm the founder and CEO of Emerald Associates, and I'm joining you today from Calgary. So let's start talking about updating. And I think I'll start off with a quick poll just to see how folks are doing updating right now. So there's a lot of different ways to approach updating. You might do meetings with folks and get the updates that way. You might have Excel files that you send them. You might have contractors that send you their updates in XCRs or XML files or just emails with notes. And some people don't even do updating. So I'll show results for the folks who answered, which is fine. If you don't want to answer, that's fine too. So it can be a wide range of different approaches. And what we want to be doing as a team, putting project management together, schedules together, we want to be able to know how the project is going as often as we can. So updating becomes very important for decision making. But in this day and age, our projects are more complicated, they're more complex. We might have multiple vendors providing assistance from all around the world. We might have joint ventures or public-private partnerships. So the funding sources, the reporting can be much more complicated. So more coordination. So it can be a challenge, no doubt, to get the updating done in a timely manner, in a consistent manner, using just P6 without some additional tools on top. So this is what we're going to show you today. We're going to show you one of the tools that we have many clients using for updating. So it's our CAPPS tool. We also have another updating tool with barcode scanning. That's called TAPS. So that is a fantastic tool if you're in turnarounds and you need to do a lot of updating very quickly. There's no faster way to get updates done. So that's another option. Some of you might know our P6 loader, which pulls things out in Excel, which is another option we've got for updating. And then within the Primavera toolkit itself, Team Member is an updating specific tool built by Oracle. And the flavor of that is a little different. So I'll touch on some of the differences as I start showing you the software. And then you might use the P6 web app, the P6 EPPM, to deploy certain layouts for updating. So that's another updating approach. So the point really is updating is important. It doesn't always get the attention that it needs. And we put a lot of pressure and strain on the schedulers to get all the updating done. You can look at some of these tools to see whether you can make better use of the tool, these different tools, different options, so that you can sort of spread out the updating as close to the responsibility as you can, just to make it easier to get more frequent updates, okay? So I'm going to ask another quick question. How often do you do your updates? Now, of course, it's going to depend a bit on your project, but what we're striving for is frequent updates. So if you're in a large capital project, weekly would be awesome. Lots of our capital project groups still do monthly. Some are at every 2 weeks, which is an improvement, but many are still at monthly, and we're trying to drive it so they can get to weekly at minimum. Daily is tough if you're in a big capital project, but certainly if you're in more of a small project, smaller in terms of length, you want to get frequent updates. If you're in a maintenance environment, if you're in a turnaround environment, you have to strive for daily, no doubt about it. Okay, so it definitely depends a bit on your specifics. But we don't want to be sitting at monthly. We want to be driving that more often, because in a month, a lot of things can happen. And your scheduling teams want to be on top of what's going on. Now, we're always struggling with different systems, different software. So that's certainly a roadblock and a challenge we've got to overcome. And I think you're going to see when I show you CAPPS, it really makes it's been built for non-P6 users. It's tabular. It's very simple to work with. So we've tried to make it as easy to work with as possible in a nice tabular format. And that way you don't have to be a P6 expert. And the whole point is to get those updates more often so that we can streamline that process. And I'm going to show you how you can review and approve within P6. We also have approvals in CAPPS if you need an alternate reviewing process. And you want to be able to make sure your team can make good decisions. That is the whole point. We want to identify any impacts on the project as quick as possible. That's the whole objective that we're striving for with getting more updating more often. So let me explain how CAPPS works, and then I will jump into showing it to you live within CAPPS and P6. So in terms of deployment, so you can deploy CAPPS a few different ways. So if your P6 is inside your own network, your own server system, CAPPS can be deployed there. It is a web app though, so there's nothing that needs to be installed on the user's machines, okay? So it is a web app. So that takes a bit of a load off your IT team. Now, if your P6 is up in the cloud, it could be in the Oracle cloud, or maybe you're hosting it with Emerald, or you're hosting it with someone else. You can deploy CAPPS inside your servers or inside the Emerald cloud. So you got a lot of options there. Or you can put it in the cloud where you've got your P6, okay? So in terms of where and how you deploy it, it's very flexible, should be able to meet your needs. Now let me explain generally how it works. So it's a web-based tool, as I mentioned. It's tabular, it's a grid form. In terms of accessing it, so we use the P6 API or web services components. So the control of the users is up in your P6. So we try to make as much of the CAPPS functionality work with the P6 framework already, so that you didn't have a bunch of different systems to have to manage things in. So we tried to take that approach. So the user list and the data available to that user is all controlled up in P6. So if you only want them to be able to see dates and activities, no resources, no expenses, you just put that in the security model in P6. And then CAPPS will adhere to that security model. So that's the way that we've built that. So the person logs in, the user logs in to CAPPS. They get a self-serve updating window with things that you have set up they're allowed to see. And what we try and use is we take advantage of your activity codes, your project codes, to make it easy to filter what a particular user needs to see. They do the updates, they submit it. It either goes into an approval queue in CAPPS. In parallel, it goes into P6. So we never hold things up in CAPPS. It goes to P6 automatically. And the schedulers inside of P6 have the ultimate control over what happens with the data coming from CAPPS. Okay, so again, we didn't want to build a bunch of hierarchical things that will slow down updates. We wanted to keep it lightweight, make sure the data is in P6, and the ultimate control is with the P6 team. And then you can see the updates that they've submitted, start, finish dates, on hold dates, suspend, resume if you use that, resources if you use that, steps if you use that, expenses, You review it, you can reject certain updates if you wish, and then they will see that up in CAPPS. They can resubmit and whatnot. Okay, so the point is to make it easier for updating, not to put a bunch of overhead in the middle with a bunch of approvals, having to go into other software to do those approvals. That was not our strategy here. Okay, so for a few differences that I would say, if you're looking at team member versus CAPPS, approvals are done up in the P6 web in team member. So if you don't really use that, that's a little bit of another layer you've got to deal with. So we didn't do it that way. I'll show it to you in a minute. And their tool was designed to be used on the telephone. Okay, so on a mobile. Our tool was designed to be used on a computer or a tablet. It can be used on a mobile, definitely, but it wasn't designed with that user interface in mind per se. Okay, so the user interface, I think in CAPPS is a bit easier to work with, but the point really is those are the main differences I would say out of the gate that you'll see in those two tools, okay? Okay, so I'm gonna jump in and I'm going to show you the tool in action. And certainly if there are questions as I'm demoing it, feel free to put them in the question room and I'll tackle them as I go. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my other monitor and I'm going to work with P6 as well as CAPPS. So those are going to be the two tools that I'm going to look at as I demo. Okay, so that's CAPPS and this is P6. Let's start with P6 just to give you the lay of the land of the data that I've put together for the demo and how you use this in CAPPS. Let's start in P6. So CAPPS is multi-user, multi-project, just like P6. So we can have more than one user accessing CAPPS at a given time, and they can see more than one project's data. So let's say you have, depending on how you want the updating to go, some of our clients, they have a project manager who is going to be the submitter. And that submitter may or may not have an approver. And we also have the ability for someone to review. So they're not approving, but they're reviewing, giving feedback. Okay, so you can do it a variety of different ways. Now, you may have one person who's going to do the updates. So you might have, in this case, Nicole Jardin, she's the submitter. But you can see here, Mary Lynn is the submitter on this project. Okay, so you can have one person doing all the updates. If that's the case, you would use a project code to tag who is doing the updates. But that doesn't always meet your needs. In many projects, you might have to go into the activity level. And let me switch to a different layout. And let me show you kind of a setup layout, if you will. So if you have the need, come on. There we go. I clicked on the wrong button. There we go. That's better. So if you have the need to not just use one submitter, one approver, one reviewer, and you need to go into a bit more detail in terms of who's going to do the updates, that's okay too. So we can use activity codes in that example and get a little bit more detailed. So in this case, I'm saying I have different submitters. Even within one WBS, I have Ian that will submit, Sue, Nicole. So 3 different submitters here. Okay, so you can do that. That's perfectly okay. So we can use project codes or activity codes to get into who's going to do the updates and who's going to be responsible for getting those updates to you. Now, we could go even deeper. So in this example, I have different vendors who are putting together the work. So they're responsible for the different work packages likely. So those vendors, may also have different disciplines and or different crews that are actually going to do the work. So we can get to a very nice level of granularity just using stuff that you're probably already doing. Activity codes for responsibilities, activity codes for who's actually executing the work. So in this case, the crew, or discipline, okay? When you're in the office, you're looking at engineering, it's usually a discipline-based updating. When you're out in the field, it's usually a crew-based updating. So we can handle all that with CAPPS very easily, trying to use things that you're probably doing already with activity codes, project codes, just to keep it simple and take advantage of the work that you're likely doing already. So, so that's sort of the level of coding that I've used in P6. So what is that? 4 or 5 different activity codes, so not very heavy duty at all. If you want to do areas and all this good stuff, certainly we can look at those codes that you've got and help use those in working in CAPPS. So let me go up into CAPPS. So I've logged in already. I've logged in as Nicole J, and I've got my list of activities. So let me just make that a little bit bigger so you can see it better. Okay. And let me explain what we're looking at. So first and foremost, when you log in, I'm going to go to the most complicated layout available in CAPPS, and then I'll show you kind of the way that we've built it so that you can make it easier for users, depending on the data that you need for your updating. So we can update activities, so tasks, we can update resources, we can update expenses, we can update steps. So all the different components that you might want to take advantage of in P6, we can update all of those. Now, we've added 2 additional tabs for information only: predecessors and successors. Okay, so there's no updating here. This is for information only. Now, what the benefit of this tab can be is we're showing durations and floats. So the person that's updating, if they want to see the successor and the impact, they can see at a quick glance sort of what the float is on the activities coming off of a particular activity. So in this case, my mining, piping, engineering design work, engineering work package 1, they can see the successors coming off of it, okay? Now you can see here, this one has 0 float. So if I'm slipping on this one, definitely I'm having an impact on the critical path, okay? So these 2 tabs are for information only. And then this tab is where you see some statistics, some information about deviations. So variances either on start finish, variances on labor, duration, expenses. So this is giving another bit of data to the user of the updates so they can see what's going on and what the impacts are. Now, these will be darn close to what P6 calculates. They may not be exactly what P6 calculates, but it gives a good flavor to the person doing the updates of what's going on with this, okay? This is also where approvers will work, and some approvers in using CAPPS. If you want an approver in CAPPS only, so you might have your project manager review and approve prior to sending it into P6, this is where they would do it, okay? So I'm not in that mode right now, I'm in a submitter node, and that's why you can see these buttons are grayed out at the moment, okay? Okay, now let's go to the tasks and just get our feet wet on what we're seeing here. So the way we work in CAPPS is similar to P6, where we have layouts. And layouts are saved and administered inside this layout area in the configuration tab. So you can see that I navigated to the layout with all the tabs. But if you want to have just activities only without resources, expenses, etc., you can have that too. So you can mix and match. So let's say you're working with an engineering company on, or maybe you are the engineering company, and for one client, you're updating tasks and resources. For another client, you might be using steps. So you can mix and match. It's not one size fits all here. So that was something important to us. We wanted to give you the flexibility, and that's why we have layouts inside of here as well. Okay. Now, the layouts are saved as you work. So if I make edits to this, so for example, this little widget here lets me control the fields that I'm seeing on my screen. And what we've tried to do is make it very simple, and we've exposed the main fields that people might use. Perhaps in your group, you don't use suspend and resume, so we can just turn those off. And perhaps we're not using any real labor, summary labor elements. So we could just turn these off, okay? And that's essentially changing all the fields that are available. And once I've got that the way I want, I can just save a new layout and it'll be there and available next time. Now, inside the layout, not only do we have the controllers of the fields we actually want to have on the screen, we also have the ability to put filters. So that's what these little funnel items on every one of these is letting you do. It lets you do a layout for each one of the columns, very easy to use. So I might want to create a layout for my Engineering X group, doing my updates when with them, and I might be doing those in a meeting once a week. So I could very easily just filter out for Engineering X, and I've got that, and I can save it into my layout, okay? So maybe I want just to do a look-ahead filter, okay? So I could do a filter by condition and give me only what is before, let's say I'll go for a few weeks, let's say I'll go for, a month, okay? So I can do a filter like that as well. So it's a look-ahead filter, okay? And you'll see the little icon here letting you know that you've got a filter. It turns to this little orange color, okay? So it helps you know very quickly where your filters are, okay? So that was important to us when we built this, is to make it easy for the user up in CAPPS, because they're not a P6 expert. They don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of P6 at all. We wanted to make it very simple for them to work with, okay? Okay, so let's start with doing an update. I'm going to start with a simple update, and I'm going to move to a layout that I've already made. And it's essentially the scenario that I mentioned. I just want to do updates to my activities, and it's for my updates with my Engineering X group, providing engineering services. Okay, so you might have noticed the layout of the columns is a little different. And that's another thing I didn't mention. You can actually rearrange the order of these columns very easily. So you can just drag and drop and drag and drop, and things will change in terms of the order. And again, those get saved inside your layout. Okay, so let's run through what we're seeing on the screen. So we've got a few other flags here to help the user in CAPPS understand what they're looking at. So you can see here we've got a critical field here. So we're trying to highlight the activities that are critical or near critical. Okay, so that's what this yellow is. And near critical can be configured. Anything without that has a lot of float, and not to be so concerned with. Now, if you want them to actually see the float, that is a field that is available on screen as well. So we can have the float on screen as well in addition. Okay, not everyone necessarily knows what that means. So that's why we tried to use a simple flag. The next one you can see is one you're familiar with if you use P6. It's whether the activity is in progress or not. And these ones aren't, these green ones. And so that's another, just a quick visual, okay, that will help the user know that this is in progress versus hasn't started, okay. Now, the next one, this one is a CAPPS specific. This is letting us know what's going on with the approvals and the reviews of these activities. So a check mark, a green check mark, means it has been submitted and the last update was accepted, okay, into P6. So the scheduler ultimately said, okay, this update is fine. These warnings, that's letting you know that they didn't like something. So they gave some sort of feedback. And that feedback, they didn't immediately approve it. They asked you to re-review it. And then the last indicator is this X. So that's letting you know that not only did they not approve it, they rejected it. They said something's wrong with the last update, okay? So this is super handy because you can filter on anything that was last submitted and you can see whether there's anything that you, as the submitter, needs to double check, okay? So that was the idea with that, okay? So you can see what was submitted and you can check right away whether there's a problem. Okay, so you don't even have to look at the approvals. You could just look at the review, re-review it and reject it. So that would even filter it down even more. Okay, so that way you can make sure that the communication with the scheduling folks is being done very, very well. Okay, so they might review these every day, accept them, so you could be double checking those. So this lets you know that there was something wrong with that. And you would go into this area and do the same thing. So let's just do the review and rejected ones. So that lets you know right there that there was a problem with it. And then you could double check it and work on what went wrong here. Okay. Okay. Now let's ignore those for a minute. We can fix those as we run through them. So I'm going to turn them all back on. And let's do some updates just to give you the feel of it. Okay. Now, even before I do that, I'm going to jump into P6 and I'm going to show you where the P6 person, so the scheduler, would be receiving the submissions from CAPPS. So again, we're trying to use the functionality you're already comfortable with in P6. So I've just made a layout that is showing me the submissions inside P6 client. Okay, so that's a key thing for us. We didn't want you to have to go up into the web. Like with team member, you go into the web and you do the approvals up there. We didn't want that strategy. We wanted the strategy of just using what you're used to. And in this case, it's a layout with the right fields in P6. So this is where the go review it is happening. This is rejected and the approvals. Okay, so that's the last submission. And that is what's controlling what we were just looking at on the screen here in CAPPS. So let's do some updating. Okay, so I have some activities that are in progress. They started already. So some of these should be finishing. And of course, this is a demo database, so my dates don't make a heck of a lot of sense. But let's go ahead and update this and say that this got finished this week. Now, very late, of course, so likely I would want to have a note here to explain why this was so late. So we have two notes inside of this little box. So we actually have a short note, which is a user-defined field, and we have a notebook if you want to put in a longer piece of information. So we have a box that does both. So I'll just put a note in here. We finally got this finished, and we can have a longer note in here if we want to. The delays have been addressed, and the work is done. Okay, so you can just type what you need to in here. So it's going to go into the notebook as well as the user-defined field. So we have both available depending on your needs, but in one slot to make sure the real estate is well looked after here in CAPPS. So we're going to actually have one of the activities going to completion, and that's our 060 activity. The next activity here is in progress, so it was started, but it's still got some remaining duration, so 10 days. So I can change that remaining duration. I can say we have 5 days left, and let's actually say 5 days, so 5D, we'll put it in correctly, and this percent complete, again, is a rough calculation. It may not be exactly what P6 is going to calculate because, of course, it uses calendars and a little bit more meat on it to do the full calculation. But this gives a rough idea to the user of where they're at. Okay. So that's 2 updates. So let's do one more. So let's actually start an activity that hasn't started. So I did activity 60 and 65. And I'll go ahead and I'll do one of these down here, which hasn't started. So this is activity 120. Okay. So we can go ahead and say this has started, and we can put the start date in. So perhaps it started this week. So it's late. It started late. And again, we can put a note in here on what's going on. I can put the remaining duration in. So I still have currently, what's that saying? It's saying 45 days. I might know that I'm going to forecast that I have to go longer. So 50 days would be an example there. Okay. So there's a few of the updates. I could, certainly this one was rejected, and it's conceivable that I had done something wrong. The note would explain it, and I can fix that up. And because I've made an edit to it, it's going to get resubmitted. Okay, so that's going to go into P6 with a resubmit on it. So it's going to go in with another visual that I didn't have in here was a little eye, blue eye for information, letting you know that it's been resubmitted, but it hasn't been reviewed yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. And whoops, I wonder if I was logged out. Just a second. I might have to redo that. Let me just log back in. I might have been logged out and timed out. So let me just double check that one, and I'll redo those real quick. No, that one looks okay. Actually, let me refilter that vendor. Okay, that's good. And 60, 65. No, I think I'm going to have to redo it. So that's no problem. So I'll do 5 days just to give you an idea. Oops, 5D. And that one's finished. Let's go ahead and finish this other one as well, just to give an idea. And then let's do this one down here just to get one started and put some progress on it. And I'll say that we're looking like we're going to trend to go late. So we'll go in at 50 days. Okay. And this one, I think I was going to do a new update, and I put it to 1 week sooner as the start date. And again, I can put a note here, especially because that had been rejected. So fixed the start date to March. Okay, so that way we've got some good communication going in a simple way back into P6. Okay, so let's save that. Okay, so the progress was saved, which is good. And then I can go back in and I can use a different layout and do some more updating. Okay, so you can, very flexible. And the next round of updating I'll do using resources, expenses, steps. So I'll do a bit more meat on the update, the next update. Okay, so let's go into P6. So the submit took place. So I can go into my reviewing layout, which this is it, and I just refresh it. So I could be in this layout many times in a day if I want to, okay, just to see what sort of submissions are being sent in to P6. So I can see here, I've got the status of the submission. I can see who did the submission. So it's me in my case, it's Nicole J, the submitter here. Whoops, I don't know why this layout does this. I'll just, okay, so you can see that. You can see whether the activity is in progress, not started. So you can see those submissions there. And we can review them in this layout very easily, okay? So let's take a look at some of the information that was submitted. So we have, I'll just scroll over so we can look at some of the information that was submitted. So we can see the calculated % complete of an activity. And that's an important piece, just so we have an idea of what the percentages for coming in at. It may not be exactly how P6 calculates it, as I mentioned, but it's a close approximation. Then we can also start to take a look at the different notes. So here's that one I just put in, fix the start date to March, okay? So you can see that, oops, it's just something weird with this layout. When I highlighted it, loses the text, so there you go, that's the note there. Now, if I want to see the notebook, of course, we need to go into the notebooks and we can see the notebook information. And you can just scroll through those. Okay, so here's one of the ones I did in a different CAPPS webinar. Okay, so you can see the notebook as well. So it's just as simple as putting together a layout. Now then I can move over and look at more information. So you can either do this in one layout, which I've done, or if it's easier, you can have different layouts, okay, with dates, labor, and so on. So I've just done it in one layout. So I can scroll across and you can see the different updates. So let's look at this one. So this is letting you know that the start date that was submitted from CAPPS is sooner than the original plan. And you can see we've given some visuals to the P6 user to see whether it's a good or bad update. Okay, so if you see a blue star, it means it's good. Good in a start date means we're ahead. Good in a finish date would mean we're ahead. Bad would show up with either a warning, as you can see here, or a red stop sign. So we added that feature into CAPPS so you have immediate filtering capability to see where the updates are not what you hoped for, okay? So anything good or excellent in this case is a blue star. Something not so good is red stop sign or a yield sign, and something that's exactly on time is going to be just a green. Okay, so again, trying to make it easy for the schedulers to see on those updates where something is off the rails. Okay, So this is giving a rough calculation of the variance. This is in hours. Everything in P6 is calculated in hours in the back end. So that's what we're using here, okay? So it gives you a real quick idea. So this is an example where it hasn't been so good. They're way behind starting that activity. Okay, so you can see it very quickly. So we've done the same thing on the finish date. So if there's a finish date that's come in, we're going to see it here. And again, we can calculate the variances. So you can see this one is way off the rails as well. So you might want to investigate that and see what's going on there and make sure there's at least a note, right? So in this case, in a previous update, we are going to need a change order. We were impacted. Okay, so that's a really very handy feature that you get out of CAPPS, is that very quick communication so that the project controls team can start executing on change orders or whatnot. So that's on the start and finish date. We've got the same thing on the duration. Okay, so if our duration is running longer, you can see that. If it's running shorter, you can see that. So again, same sort of flagging for the user so they can see it. If I use the suspend and resume date, we'd be managing that as well. In that update, I didn't use that. Some of our clients use the expected finish date for their updating methodology. So we also have that available as well. Okay, so I can look at the updates and I can either accept them or I can set them back for review. Oops, sorry. So this is how simple it is to do the approvals. So if that first activity was okay, I can approve it. And you can see it's just moving it down because the way I've got my layout. If there's something I don't like, I can say review it and I can put a note. And this is going to go back up to the user. And then if I reject it, again, that's going to go up to the person using CAPPS. Okay, so that's how that works. That's how simple it is, and the whole point is to get those updates through quicker. Now, once I've done that, what I need to do is I need to tell the software, the CAPPS and P6 calculator software, to actually take those updates and put them into the real P6 fields, if you will. So the way I do that is I just run the approval over here and I ask it to run those approvals. So I think my activities were all in the same project. Yeah, it looks like they were in my project 1 and project 3. So I'll just go ahead and run it on those two. And if I have to go to a meeting, I haven't had a chance to review all of them, I can just send those through and then I go to project 2 and 4. Okay, so very simple. This is going to run through, and once it's finished moving all the data, we should see it move from go to pass. Okay, now it could also fail if there was a submission that had some problems with data. It doesn't happen often, but there might be something that's sent in that doesn't make sense, in which case you would see a fail. But most of the time it should go through with a pass, because we do have some validations up in the user interface in CAPPS. For example, you can't put the finish date before the start date, right? Just like P6 wouldn't let you, that sort of thing. Okay, so it's just running through, it's going to work through, and it's going to move the data from the CAPPS fields to the P6 fields, and then that's going to show up for the CAPPS user as information that's important inside of CAPPS. So I can just start refreshing this. And I'm going to do one more update. I'm going to do a more complicated update. I just want to make sure I'm going to use the resources, steps, and expenses, just so you can see how that can work for your team. And then the information will show up here with the rejected and so on, so that I've got those available. So this layout could be different than the previous layout. My filtering criteria could be different. I can have different fields on the screen for the updating. So for example, I've got vendor and crew in here, and this is an activity code. So the activity codes can be secured, so they cannot be updated, as you can see here with the vendor, okay? So that's one that's not a pick list inside of CAPPS, but this crew is actually a pick list inside of CAPPS. So if I want to identify exactly which crew did the work, okay? Or in this case, discipline, I can use this and actually change the activity code, okay? So it's controlled. You don't have to, as you can see here, some can be secured and some can be editable by the user, okay? So that's another part I wanted to show you. And let's actually look at resources, expenses, and steps. So you can see here there's a little navigation field that lets you navigate to those particular data elements for a given activity. So in this case, I've got release to document control, I've got resources on that, I've got expenses, I've got steps. So I've got all of them on this activity 30. So if I want to navigate to the resources, I can just click on that little resource icon and it takes me to that activity. And then I can update the actual hours. Now, if this activity is not started yet, I could just use the little hyperlink to be able to start that activity. Now, this one is already started, but if there's one that wasn't, I could click on it and start it here. So 65. So I can start that activity and I can change the date. So this would probably be in 2022, April, and we can say we started that this week, okay? So that sets it to start it, and then I can start updating my actual hours. So if I get a timesheet report out of my ERP perhaps, or my timesheet system, I can put those in. The actual hours are trying to calculate the estimate to complete, holding the budget, but I can certainly forecast that I'm going to go over, okay? And again, it's trying to do a rough calculation on the percent complete for the units right there on the screen, okay? Now, that is a new activity. I can also update an existing activity that already has actuals on it, and I can, again, gather those and input the actual units. If my estimate to complete is at 0, of course, it's saying you're fully finished, but in my case, I might be going way over. Okay, so this is going to be a estimate at completion, or EAC, of 500. Now, I might be the person in charge of just doing resource updates. Okay, so I can stay in this window and just work through all the activities. I've got filtering in here as well. So I can filter on engineering X. I can filter on more than one vendor. Okay, so this screen can be used somewhat independently, completely of the tasks. Again, just depending on how you do your updating in your team. Now, I can update expenses. So I can use this little hyperlink that takes me to the expense window, and it is on the activity that I'm interested in. So very similar to resources, I can update my actual expenses. So again, I might pull that out of an ERP system and I can do the updating, and again, I can do the forecasting as I mentioned. So we can go over the values, we can go under, very simple to update. And last but not least, we can update steps. So again, I'll use the navigation on that activity, and I can see that this activity has 3 steps: issued for construction, issued for information, issued for review steps. Now these have already been progressed, it looks like, in a last update, but I can progress that to complete. I can put a note. We issued this today, and you can put your note in, and we've got notes that are in the step area, so you can see that. Okay, now this one was 100%, but maybe I need to set it back. Okay, so you have that ability in here, and I can set them as appropriate. So very simple to work with, and do your updating. And one of our clients, that's how they got engaged their engineering team in the updating process for the packages that they were putting out. So that is an important one. So they deployed just the steps screen to their lead engineers by discipline, and they could very quickly just check off these activities or these steps within the activity. And that was updating the percent completes because they use the physical option. Okay, so very important. This could be the way for you to take advantage of steps and actually be able to consume those with a non-P6 user, which is not easy to do if you're just using P6. Okay, so that could be a really great way to get a more consistent percent complete on some of the engineering work that you might have out with your team. Okay, so I did those updates, and I can go ahead and save that progress. And let me go back into P6, and I'll refresh the updates. And I think it was activity 30, I think it was. So it's this one that I did all those updates on. Sorry, this silly layout, it loses the text. So I won't point on it. And we'll just use this one, okay? So it's in progress. It had been not started right now. So right now it's not started, but it's been set to in progress from this last update. There's 3 steps in this activity, and I can go into the steps window and see what was updated on them, okay? So I've got 30%, 100, and 100, and this is the note that was typed in. Okay, so that's on the steps. So we also have some resources. Let me scroll over. And I've got that start date as we pushed it way out. So we've got the little flag warning us. It's telling us how far behind we are. And of course, my remaining duration, I'm forecasting we're going to go over. So here's some labor units. So I'm over consuming on my labor units. I'm over consuming on my expenses. So that's the roll up of the specifics that I have down in here. So my estimate to complete was 300. And of course, that's going to trend over as we're calculating here. And my expenses. So again, my CAPPS update is trending over, and we're seeing that here, okay? So if I accept that last change, okay, so although I don't love the update, I can approve it. And this looks like I had one more that I probably missed on the approval, so I could certainly approve that one as well. And then they didn't update these 2 that were reviewed in review and rejected. So had they, we would see a new submission. And I can save all those. And then one last time, I'll run through the approval. And this is on project 1. So again, I'll just set this to go. so that it runs through and makes the approvals and moves the data over, okay? So that's the process. Pretty simple, very simple, very flexible. I think a lot of good visual cues for the P6 users that have to do the approvals. We wanted to make sure that they could see what's going on. We are very aware that it's a lot of moving parts for a scheduler, and the last thing you want is updates coming in without you knowing about them. So that was our biggest thing, was to make sure all of that is very much available for the scheduler to see. So let's just see if this will run through, and what I'm hoping is we're going to see the changes. Okay, it's taking a bit of time. So this in progress should go over here. The dates should move from the CAPPS fields to the actual fields. Percent completes will be updated and so on. So let's just see. Now, typically you wouldn't be watching it the way we're watching it in a demo, right? So you would see the changes take place and move over. So, okay, good. So I think I've given you a good overview of how it works, the way the screen works, the flexibility of the layouts, how easy it really is to use and control the screen. Again, the intent was to make it easier, but very flexible. Okay, so I think I'll jump back to the PowerPoint to close out. I don't see any questions. So hopefully that meant that it's pretty straightforward. You have a good understanding of what you're seeing. Let's see if there's a question that came up. No, not yet. Okay, so let me go back to the PowerPoint and let me just do some closeout on it. Is it sharing? Okay, let me broadcast. There we go. Okay, so we took a look. We did a deep dive on updating dates, updating resources, expenses, and steps in a just a quick overview, really, on how it works. So let me touch on some of the benefits that our clients have seen from using the tool. And I'll do just a quick review of some of the clients that have used the tool in a various states, because the tool's been in development and out in the public for 10 years. So one of our early adopters actually was Petro-Canada, which of course is part of Suncor now. What they needed was the ability to give their project managers the ability to do updating, because their scheduling team at their Edmonton refinery was swamped. So they needed something that they could do updates every 2 weeks for the dates and once a month at minimum for costs and expenses. So that was the approach. So they were one of the first launch clients. So with the tool, they were able to get their updates done much more readily. And what they saw was their issue management was highly improved. So they said that they were finding out about issues 4 to 6 weeks after they were creeping in. So this made the issues be much more readily available. So that was a big thing for them. And one of the things that was causing them some grief was off-site work tracking. They were falling behind on that. So this really helped the off-site work tracking to make sure that the deliveries were much more understood. So that was a big thing. So another example was Vico Canada, which is part of CH2M now. They were using it on a few specific projects, and they were the group that deployed it to their engineering group. And the point was they were struggling with getting the updates in timely to understand exactly where the engineering disciplines were in each of the discipline areas, especially on some multidiscipline packages. So this started to help their delivery on the discipline side to turn around the packages more quickly. because they could see the priorities. That was an important piece. They were not necessarily prioritizing the right scopes because the floats weren't necessarily available to them as timely as they needed to be. So that was a big improvement that they saw in it. So another client example is a large group in Australia doing a multi-building discipline rework package. And the PMs are updating the schedules once a week, which is really helping them understand what's going on the whole portfolio. Prior to that, they were doing updates once a month only. At the same time, they were doing cost updating, and often they were really struggling to hit their reporting deadlines for their client. So this was another good example of different usage. So from the user's perspective, it's very easy to do the updates. So I can do the team updates every day from site in 15 minutes. So this is a big point of what we were trying to achieve with CAPPS. For collaboration, my engineers can get the updates into P6 without being an expert. So that was some of the feedback, which is an important piece. You don't, because sometimes the P6 folks are too busy and they become the pinch point. So this takes that pinch point away, which is an important piece on updating. We avoided several potential issues on the project with weekly updates. Okay, so that's an important piece. And forecasting is much easier. The forecasting, the visibility of the forecasting is right there. And can be critiqued and seen very quickly right there in the app. So those were some of the things we wanted to achieve on that. And I think we touched on these already. So you don't need a lot of training, just people. You can create the layouts for them in advance and make it as dynamic or as restrictive as you want. Okay, so that's very flexible. Okay, so hopefully you saw something that has some interest and potential for your team. If you don't think you're seeing exactly what you might need out of CAPPS, as I mentioned, we have our TAPS tool. So it's such a great tool for fast updating. So you can, there's a webinar for that. I think actually it was last week, but certainly you can look at the video if that looks like it might be more interesting. If you've got our P6 loader, you can use that for some updating too. And as I mentioned, you could certainly come let us know if you want to look at team member as another alternative, and P6 web is another alternative. So the key is we want to make sure your updating is not just being done by the schedulers who are overwhelmed often with the updating process. The other thing is you could look at integration, and that's something we do a lot of. So, you know, I mentioned you can get your hours from your timesheet system, your expenses from your ERP. So those are also things that you could potentially do via integration as well. Okay, so those are all things that we do, we've been doing from our inception. We've had programmers on the team from the very beginning. And that's why we have such a broad base of tools. So we saw CAPPS, we mentioned TAPS, P6 Loader. Some others we've got that you should explore for P6 are P6 Scrubber. So that's for importing XERs and XMLs. And soon down the road, we'll have the ability to look at Microsoft Project importing as well in that tool. The other tool that I talked about is Calculator. So we use Calculator to do all sorts of great calculations inside of P6. Loop detection, date detection, so on. And then I think the other one I didn't mention was our P6 QA. So that tool is being used all over the world, helping critique schedules right inside of P6. So you don't need any expensive third-party software to help you critique schedules. You do it right inside of P6, and each scheduler can run it on their own projects with different parameters. So we've got a great toolkit trying to help you take better advantage of what you've got inside of P6 and use it more effectively. And of course, P6 Reporter, so that's another one. So we've got a great engine to help you report out into Power BI, Tableau, and other reporting engines that you might be using. Okay, so that tool we've had, it's essentially our data warehouse and our dashboard tool repurposed into P6 Reporter. So if you have any gaps or any needs, Emerald has probably either done it already, has a tool that can help you, lots of different things that we've put together over the years to make P6 work better for you. Okay, so if you want some follow-up from us, feel free to answer this poll question. That just helps us know how we might best keep in communication if there is something that looks interesting for you that you want to explore. Do you want us to follow up, give you a phone call or whatnot? Okay, so that's helpful for us so we know how to follow up with you. Okay, so I'll stay on for another minute or two for questions. If there is something that comes to mind, you've got my email there and you've got our numbers in other parts of the world, but you can also just email through and we will certainly follow up with you whichever way makes most sense. Okay, so I'll just see if there are any questions. So we can investigate their physical outcomes from using the tool. Is there any organization using the tool in the UAE? Not currently, not currently. So that was one of the questions that came in from Osama. Not currently, but there's always a first. We do work with some clients in Kuwait. They're not necessarily using this tool, but we've got definitely a few clients in the Middle East, but certainly explore and we can see. And if you want to see the tool a little bit more in action, we can do a deeper dive with you on a webinar within your organization too. Okay, let me make sure I didn't miss any questions. Just asking about the recording. Yes, unless there's a problem with it, we will definitely share it with the group. Okay, so I think I'll stop it there. I ran